this is an absolutely wonderful audience to have for our book, because a few years ago, the Himalayan mountains whispered to Namita and me, and I think Sohini at Penguin overheard us. And a little later, Ma'am Ambassador also came into the story. It's a collection of folk tales, 30 of them, and the decision was to produce it specially for young readers. And these are stories from less known languages quite often, stories collected on the field, and some of them never written down before because they belong to the rich oral tradition of the Himalayas. To give you more detailed information about the book and the beauty of its production, I would request our stage manager to show you Penguin's video on the book. Well, I hope this will get you to the bookstore and get a copy. This is really something that you want to keep and pass on to your children and your grandchildren. May I now invite the panelists to formally unveil the book and launch it to this wonderful audience before us. Giant cover there. I'm sure you're all curious about how this beautiful book happened. So I'm going to request Sohini Mitra from Penguin to tell us about the process of selection, putting the book together, and why in particular the decision was to aim at the young adults.
Thank you, Mala. Folktales and folklore has always been integral to children's literature. One of the many reasons they continue to be loved is because they connect us to our roots. They're like the comfort food. You want to go back to them. And, they remind us that it is actually the stories that we share that is the most lasting legacy that we would leave behind. At Puffin, we have done a wide range of folktales for young readers over the years. But it's only in the recent years that we see a growing interest around diverse folk tales from different regions and languages, which is really positive. And while we are committed to bringing out regional stories to the fore for children through our different programs like the Puffin Classics and the Translations program, there is just so much that needs to be done if you truly want to, capture the diversity of our country and its people. I mean, it's always a work in progress. Therefore, when Namita and Malashri approached us with this marvelous treasure trove of folk tales from the Himalayan region, it was incredibly exciting. It was exciting because it promised to give an insight into a land, its people, culture, its oral folk traditions and storytelling traditions that is not often captured in Indian children's literature. So it attempted to fill a gap. And we felt that, it would spark curiosity among young readers about cultures they are not familiar with. Now, from a publishing perspective, when I look at a work of folk tales, I'd look at it from the lens of representation and preservation. By representation, I mean it is important to give voice to languages, communities, cultures that are often not captured in mainstream literature. And that's why this work becomes so significant and important, because the authors have thoughtfully curated stories from Bhutan to extensively from the Northeast to Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand. And many of these stories have been retold, chronicled, and documented for the first time in this form, in the form of this beautiful book, representing the Himalayan region. And that's why, this work is so important. And that brings me to my other point about preservation, why it's important to preserve this for the next generation. And how do you do it, right? I think books become the most tangible and meaningful way to create something of everlasting value. And that's how we see this book. The idea from the very start was to create a collectible keepsake edition with vibrant art that would serve as an archive not only for Himalayan folklore and folk tales, but also appeal to young readers and a new generation of readers who would discover them for the first time. And therefore, you can imagine that art would be such an integral aspect, of a book on folklore, and especially if it is meant for young readers. So we felt that it was important to get an illustrator from the region who would understand the cultural nuances and at the same time, add a layer of authenticity in the way these stories would be visually represented. And I'm so glad we found Dennis Leistrom, the very talented illustrator who's done the beautiful illustrations in the book. And the credit for finding him goes to my colleague Samar Bansal, the designer on this book, who's designed this stunning, absolutely gorgeous cover that you see here, and of course the inside pages. I'm sure it's something that will give you joy as you turn the pages. So it's been a supremely collaborative process. The authors have been involved from the get-go, and I'm so glad that our vision has been aligned. And I'm deeply grateful, for the support of the Norwegian embassy and to the authors for entrusting us with this work. And I'm so glad that Puffin Books would continue to be its home. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohini. But you've told us so much about the beauty of the book. Why not just hold it up to the audience? Because this cover doesn't show the absolute exciting features that this book has. In a way, it took me back to my childhood, when we had illustrated manuscript kind of finishing, the illustrations weaving through the text as though there is no difference between the written word and the pictures. And it's got gold edging on the pages. And that is something that one doesn't see anymore. So it's an unusually produced book. Thank you so much, Sohini and your team. It's really something that one wants to keep forever. I'm now going to turn to my co-author, co-editor, and dear friend Namita Gokhale, because as always, she's the idea woman, and and also belongs to the Himalayas. And it was a dream that we thought up together, that we'll put to the folk tales from the less known languages, the endangered languages, stories which had never been told before. We sent out for local storytellers, and we discovered so much. At least I learned a lot in the whole process because I didn't grow up in the hills. So over to Namita to tell us about the book.
Well, the first thing I want to do here is to thank everybody on this panel, the ambassador who made it happen just now, and Sohini who made it happen, and for me and Malashri who chased an elusive dream. I'm from Nainital in the Himalayas, and the Himalayan folktales have been always very close to me. I'm going to tell you a story which made them even closer, but it's a bit of a nothing to do directly with this book, but yet everything to do with it. In 1867, somebody called Ivan Menyayev came to Kumaon, where I come from, and wrote down the stories of that time. And then somebody translated my book into German, and he said, I know all about Kumaon. And I said, how do you know about Kumaon? And he said, oh, I've read the Folktales of Kumaon. Okay, I stored that away. In German, he said, I've read it. Then I met a Russian, Sergei, friend of mine. He said, oh, I know all about Kumaon. I said, how? He said, I've read the Folktales in Russian. And this Ivan Menyayev was a spy. And apart from being a spy, he was an ethnographer. And it was the time of the Grimm's fairy tales and all that. So it was a time when it was fashionable to chase fairy tales. It also gave him a cover because it was the time of the great game to go from village to village and ask them all kinds of inconvenient questions. What are the British up to? And at the same time do these stories. I got those translated back into English from those stories and found the same stories exist even today. And then tried to get support for this project from 2010 onwards. From various people, begged, borrowed, nothing happened. And then I can see my dear friend in the audience, and my Manu Arya and Ambassador Hans-Jakob Friedland and her. Between them, they have a small languages project. And on that basis, they gave us support to look for writers from all over the Himalayas. And then, so Mala got the order wrong because first we went to the ambassador and then we went to Sohini. Not that it matters, but as our Prime Minister says, our chronology samajhiye. Okay, now I'm just going to quickly read out the points because this time of the year I'm a little confused with the lit fest around me everywhere. The Himalayas are the tallest, the youngest mountains in the world. This has a lot to do with it. They're young mountains, tall mountains, and they are mountain communities spread across the span of the Himalayan arc, which are rich in the diversity of their traditions and narratives. And yet there's a thread of commonality behind this diversity. There's a distinct Himalayan identity across a footprint of 2,500 miles, a commonality in the flora, the fauna, the food and music traditions, and the riverine systems, in an animistic belief in the towering mountain presences and the power of nature, and in the stubborn and you could say cussed nature of the mountain people. Now this cussed nature of mountain people reflects in these stories. Mountain people are notoriously stubborn, and they are so apparently in the Alps, in the Rockies, in the Andes. There's something about they feel like they are the rocks and they're not very tractable. Now the impulse came out of that belief. Folktales are often dismissed as children's tales, but they are in fact a serious branch to study. Their collective memory carries the child's imagination, but contains within it, it is important that it's a child's imagination, but as these stories are told, they contain within them the wisdom of the crone, of the old woman, the cunning of the trickster, because the tricksters are always in the stories, the fluidity of the shapeshifter. We have a number of shapeshifter stories here. And the instinctual understanding of the animal kingdom, because the animal kingdom is a part of folktales always. Man is just one of the animals in the planet, which in modern urban life we tend to forget. The ethnography of the Himalayas remains embedded in the myth and the epic, in gods and demons, shamans and earth spirits, and a lot of the stories are also reflected in the Mahabharata. a huge amount of them in the Manas Khand and other sections. Now, I wanted to return to these stories with their innocence, their wit and wisdom, and the Norwegian embassy support of the project gave us the opportunity to then reach out with the material we had collected, the languages in which, because we reached out to a group of, Mala, how many was it? About 35 people? Yes. All writers or university professors across the Himalayas to go and research. And of course, we did other research as well. And so this has been put together by a huge community of folktale lovers. A line I read many years ago has remained with me over the years. To quote, to become truly mature is to return to the sense of earnestness of the child at play. There's a child at play here in all these stories. And working on these folktales was a return to innocence for me at least. And for Mala. I know these stories will find resonance outside the pages of this book. They will be told and retold across new media, emerging platforms, continue to be read out by grandparents to their grandchildren, and maybe an AI grandparent will read it to their AI grandchildren. Never know these days. Then, folktales belong to the oral traditions. They belong to the collective consciousness of the Himalayas. They've been told and retold by centuries, if not millennia. We who belong to the mountains share the responsibility of honoring and remembering these stories. There's somebody in the audience who will know all these stories, which is my cousin Pushpesh Pant. He's a repository of wisdom on the Himalayas. And there he is waving his hand. So all of us across the mountains share this commonality of these stories. The Bhutanese writer Kunsang Chodan, whose stories are a part of the book, has said, the thing about oral traditions is that no one owns them. There's no copyright. The fact that I wrote them down does not mean they are mine. Folktales are often dismissed as children's books. They are, in fact, a serious branch of study. Their collective memory carries so much material, and they pay tribute to the spirit of mountains and valleys, rivers, and lakes. They are stories for children to know and adults to remember. So, those of you who want to return to the child within, for adults to remember the wisdom of these stories sometimes is very meaningful, and to share with the younger people in your life. They arm the young to unblinkingly understand the harsh truths of life without the sanitized retellings of the Disney world, and to remind the older generation of the enduring ways. So I really feel very strongly that I love Disney films, but Disney's interpretation of the folktales of Europe and of other places, the old Disney interpretations, made them easy, like sugar-coated capsules. But actually, if you think of those old fairy tales, if you think of the Little Mermaid and the pain she suffered in, losing her tail, there's a whole different story there, and so on. So these stories, they've not been sanitized, though there were one or two stories, I must tell you, May-Elin, where my friend Sohini told me and Mala, she says, this one, I'm not sure. It's very savage. And the stories are very savage. And children love those savage stories. But the parents sometimes get a little worried that what are they reading? So the stories continue. Often one story takes off where the other ends. We meet them again and again in stories and in real life. The wicked ogre, the patient princess, the gentle python, the wily trickster, the ghosts, the goblins, the fairies, and the elves. And the world is young again. Thank you.
Thank you, Namita, for recapturing those months of wonderful discoveries as we came into the stories. But we were also curious to know about folktales in other parts of the world, and we are so grateful to the Embassy of Norway for supporting this project, because Norway has a great tradition of folktales. So I would request Ambassador Stener to tell us more. But before we go to her speech, there is another film for all of you, because nothing like seeing those things on the screen and in terms of images. So let's take a look at that a short film based on Norwegian folktale, and then we will have Ambassador Stener tell us about.
What a strange-looking old man over there by the tree stump. Poor old man, all crooked and wretched. Good day, wonderful weather.
And good day to you, young man. Where are you headed?
I'm going into the forest, you see, to build a ship that goes as fast on land as at sea. And in the air, too. For the king has proclaimed that whoever can build such a ship shall have his daughter's hand in marriage and half the kingdom.
A better reply than the two that earlier passed by. They just said to carve troughs. And that's what they got. So what's in your sack,
Oh, not much to speak of. It's supposed to be my supper. I snuck away with 2 oatcakes and some stale beer.
A better reply than the two that passed by earlier. They said it was mud, and so mud it became. Share your supper with me, and I'll help you.
You're welcome, if you like.
Bless you for your kindness, lad. Sit down, and I'll tell you what to do. Do you see that old oak tree over there? Cut a chip off the tree, and then put it back from where it came. Do you understand? When you've done that, you can go to sleep.
Well, Ashlad did as the old man said. He then went to sleep, and in his dreams he thought he heard the sounds of chopping and hammering, sawing and carpenting, but he could not awake before the old man woke him.
Lad, time to wake up and have a look at your ship.
What? Ship? What a grand ship! Such a beautiful sail, and look at her stem. Is she really mine?
Yes, that's your ship. Now hop on board and take aboard everyone you meet.
Yes, I'll keep that in mind, and thank you.
Goodbye, and the best of luck.
Goodbye. Goodbye. Away we go. Away we go through the forest. Oh, what a splendid ship. I can't wait to show it to the king and all of his subjects. Wow, we're rising. We're rising up in the air. If only my brothers could see me. They'd be flabbergasted. I think I'll head straight for the castle. What's that? There's someone sitting in the quarry. The old man told me to take aboard everyone I meet. I'll ask him if he wants to come along. Oh my word! What's the matter with him? Is that a rock he's eating? Hello? Why are you sitting there eating rocks?
Oh, the trouble is that I'm so hungry for meat that I can never get enough of it. So you see, I have to resort to eating rock. I would like to come along if there's room on board your ship.
And you're welcome aboard.
Many thanks. You don't mind if I take my dinner with me, do you? It's a bit heavy, but we should be all right.
Yes, come on, let's try, shall we?
Well, thank you. Now you have seen a short part of a film made by a Norwegian folk tale. This tale is called The Ashlad and His Good Helpers. You saw part of what it was about, but it is the youngest son. His 2 older brothers has just passed by this older man. They were not as generous as him with what they had in their sack, so they had to just walk by, and he didn't build the ship for them. But by generosity and curiosity, the Ashlad, he gets helpers who can do wonders. If you go online and see the rest of the film or read the folk tale, you will also see how this rock-eating man comes in handy when he comes to the king and asks for the princess's hand. He wins the princess and the kingdom too. He is a very well-known figure in many Norwegian folk tales. I just wanted to show it to you to say also that these Norwegian folk tales, they were also oral. They were gathered in the late 19th century, like Namita and Malashri has been helping doing now in the Himalayas and helping to translate into English. These films, or some of them, were made into films in the 70s. This is what I grew up with as a child. These are the stories that we were told, and in this way. So it shows that this is a project. For me, when I came to India, is really close to my heart. It became immediately. My predecessor is among the audience here, and that has already been mentioned. But he was the one who signed the project. So I think it also showed it's something that is close to every Norwegian's heart. This project we have called formally Preserving Folktales and Folklore in the Himalayan region. Also, Namita, you were mentioning, we have called it at the embassy the Small Languages Project. I didn't really understand immediately. I had to be explained what it was about. But it is obvious also for a Norwegian. We have a small language. We are bringing it out to the world, and we wanted to help doing that as well. This project, though, is in line with a few other objectives of the Norwegian government that I also wanted to inform about. We have a focus on democracy and human rights. We believe it's the basis for lasting peace, stability, and development. And promotion of rights-based and democratic management of cultural heritage is important to support democracy and human rights. Secondly, we wanted to help protect local heritage and protect cultural rights of small community. This project will hopefully work as a model for protecting the heritage of the local languages, people, and their tradition. The children's book that we are launching today, that is so beautiful as the films being made in Norway in the 70s. And it is really a great testament to all our efforts. The third objective of a Norwegian government also that is highlighted in this project is focus on the environment. Norway and India, we work extensively on climate and environment projects together. This project adds a useful dimension to that work as it collects local knowledge on nature, conservation, and environmental legacies, and the wisdom of survival at the grassroots level. So these are the reasons why we think this was really important. I'm just so heartened also to say, to see the beautiful book that has come out today. There are several more folk tales behind here that you have also made such a good job making this book. So congratulations to the entire team that has really been patient, persistent, and carried out this work. And there has been such challenges and teething troubles on such a happy day. We don't need to go into that. It's just to congratulate and just to say on behalf of Norwegian Embassy and Norway that we are so happy to be part of this. And really we are eager and excited to see how popular this book will become and how other parts of this project will unfold. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Namita, please go ahead. It would be wonderful to...
So all of you here, you are here at the Jaipur Literature Festival because you love books. And books are being presented in so many different ways now. But for me, the book object remains primary. And as a book object, as something produced with love and care, I think we should all hold up our pictures. We need a photo op, please, somebody, of holding, because these books They are beautiful. Go to the bookstore and get some. Some meaning if you have 2 grandchildren, then get 2. If you have a nephew, so on. But they are so beautiful that the Jaipur bookmark looks at the book, and Manisha is sitting in the wings. She helped with the editing as well. And yeah, these are the things behind the literary festival. It is these creatures with covers and spines that mean everything to us. Thank you.
Well, one of the points made by all the panelists has been the environmental legacy. And personally, when I was going through the number of stories that came our way, and also the film that we saw today from Norway, the link between human beings and nature, the interdependency, the conversation, the changing of shapes and conditions. How would you like to read a story about a snake prince who falls in love with a human princess? And he can change himself into a very handsome young man when he wants to be. And the human princess can also change herself into a very graceful snake and live underwater. So these things which appear to be miraculous, unreal to maybe the adult education, the imagination, are part and parcel of the book that we are placing before you. So there are shapeshifters and ogres. There's a spell which separates the waters and you can walk through it. So there are 2 little orphan boys who just managed to learn the spell, quickly part the waters, go on the other side, and then shut the waters again. So we have these lovely stories. Is there anything that either of you would like to say about this? Maybe your personal experience of listening to stories in your family? Anything that you'd like to put in as a last word before we open it up for questions?
I actually grew up with stories in my mother tongue, Bangla, and that is really the fondest memory that I have. Not just of the stories of Tuntuni Pakhi and many of Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary's works, but actually, as a listener, what you remember is also the intonations, the pauses, and the way these stories are narrated. For me, it was my father who did it, who introduced me to it, and I have the fondest memory of that.
Can I add to that? So there are a lot of stories from Bhutan here. And there's a story called Mimi Hele Hele, which begins Dangbo, Dingbo, oh, Dingbo, Dangbo. And that's how the storytellers begin when they tell the story to get the attention. And then the audience has to say, to show that they are listening. And this whole oral communication is a different world, different from the one-edged passive watching on screen.
So true.
And yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Open to the audience.
So now we open to questions from the audience, and we can keep them short and precise. It'll be easy to get through for several people.
There's one there.
Can we have a mic there? Yes.
Thank you very much for a wonderful discussion. I'm very excited to read the book. My question is, when you have these stories in the oral tradition, of course they are very different in each telling. How did you approach the process of choosing exactly which telling to include in your beautiful book?
Could I answer that? Well, there were conversations between me, Sohini, Malashri, the other editor, Prerna. There were so many of us in this project, and we then tried to find the one that would be able to appeal to children or young readers of this generation, that wouldn't puzzle them, that they could hold on to. That was it. Because it is not an academic work. This is a storytelling.
Any other? Yeah.
One very simple question. Have you put a timeline as to when some of these stories came by? Like the ambassador just said, that the story that came by was from the 18th century or late 18th century.
The stories were gathered in the 18th century. They
Sorry?
must. I said those stories would have been gathered, collated in the 18th century. They were not written in the 18th century. What happened in the 18th century was that the brothers Grimm began their process of picking up stories and telling them. It was mixed up with so many other themes, the noble savage. I mean, it was just a movement back to some more primal roots around the world in some literatures. And so they found similarly old stories which they recorded. So they were recorded and it became fashionable for the people to record them. And even people like Hans Christian Andersen then picked up from those and used them and retold them. So we don't know when. All we know is that some of the stories date from the Mahabharata, because a lot of the epic stories come from the time of the Mahabharata. And many of the stories later become later editions, they say they come from the Mahabharata, but they may not.
Well, may I just add to what Namita was saying, that this is an oral tradition that has been for hundreds of years, and you have showed how that has been done in these regions here. This is exactly the same in Norway, and there were two guys who gathered these folktales in the late 19th century, and they are really famous in Norway. It's, you know, the names. It's like the Brothers Grimm, or it's like Hans Christian Andersen. It's the same. They have the same status. And if you happen to see one of those films made, it's always starting with real people. And that's an old man coming into a home or somewhere where he sits down, and this is one of the two guys gathering the folk tales, and he sits down there and he's saying, "Can you tell me the story, and I will write it down." So that shows very well that this is a long oral tradition, but then it's being written down, and always, even in films then in this case, but that's a connection.
There's a mic here, and there are two people, and we have 4 minutes, so 2 minutes each. Go there first. Just hurry up.
Thank you for this brilliant session. I'm also from a part of the Himalayas, the eastern foothills, Shillong in Meghalaya. The Khasis have a very rich tradition of folk tales, legends. You know, Nonkin Tree, Janice Perrier, they've been writing extensively right now. And while, you know, a book for the younger, the kids, the younger adults, welcome, I also personally feel that folk tales kind of, you know, attach you to your soil. What we are currently missing, we live in apartments, our kids cannot tell from a dahlia, you know, cannot tell a gladioli from a dahlia, and, you know, so you do not connect to the soil. Our next generation is not connecting to the soil. You do not connect to your soil, you cannot protect it. I want to ask this beautiful panel that the kids are there, but can you reignite it for the adults? Can you bring it back for the adults and connect the adults again to the soil?
The fact that this book is so beautifully produced, maybe it will lead to some parents leading their children back to where their homes once were, the hills that they called home. That's all we can hope for.
And one of the difficulties, of course, you pointed out, we had lots of Khasi stories here. The small languages, because translation becomes an issue. Not only gathering the oral material, but also translating it into English is a long and difficult process. But this book has some absolute gems which have never been written in English before.
And there's another book coming out for grown-ups with more stories. But the thing is that, for example, Mala found that there were some Naga tribes that were reluctant to part. They had meetings within themselves, and we said, we don't want our stories retold. They are sacred. I think.
It is.
Okay, yes.
So let's move on to, this will be the last question.
Briefly touching upon what you said, Namita, that we are one of the mammals on the planet. However, even though we are one, we really are on top of the food chain. Now, and we operate with total impunity and with no responsibility, most of us, towards the planet and towards the other beings on our planet. So the people who live close to nature are, I think, more humble, more connected to nature, and respect nature and other beings on the planet. It's just a comment.
I agree,
It's not a
and
question.
I think other people may also have something to say about it. All I can say is that the consequences of climate change are very humbling, and I think that nature is responding, and I think people are learning that it's not our planet alone. You wanted to say, and so many of the stories are connected to these humbling facts.
Well, I can only repeat what I also said at the outset, that this has been one of the objects for us to support precisely that local knowledge of nature conservation and knowledge on a local level to the environment. And that is, of course, crucial. So very happy that this also can contribute in a literary way to doing that. Thank you.
You want to respond to that?
I just say that
more books.
always welcome. But I do want to say that the art has also captured the nature beautifully, and I think that is an experience in itself. And I think there is just a wonderful, it just complements the beautiful narrative. And we do see the new generation, or even an adult who discovers this book, to really enter that wonderland that is captured in the pages of this book.
On that, yeah, we can take one more question.
There's just one more question there at the back. Yes, if there is a mic there. This will be absolutely the last.
This is the last one.
Thank you. So I've been a high school teacher, and of course, trying to get the kids to read. I'm a massive reader. I have 3 huge bags of books that I have no idea how I'm going to get home. Sorry. But one of the things that I found very interesting, and what have you found with the emergence of young people in social media as kind of a return to oral storytelling? Because when you look at, TikTok, when you look at Instagram, you also see a lot of oral storytelling, young people wanting to tell their stories. So what do you think about, do you think that there might be a return to oral storytelling traditions, but with a slightly different platform?
This is a puzzling question, because in early times, storytelling, drama, painting on the walls of the cave, these things were all interrelated. Then with the invention of print, the dissociation of sensibility came about, and text became important. But text remains important because when a child reads, the child interprets it in his or her own mind. When you watch an image and somebody is saying something, film is a much more, I won't call it a fascist media, but it doesn't enable the imagination. They tell you what to watch out for. So the child is just absorbing both the image and the words. Whereas if you read something, or even if somebody is telling you one-to-one, and they are not showing you all those pictures, you're not entering that world, which is also very seductive. But I think a child reading it, the sense of discovery, is different from TikTok.
Yeah,
I'm not anti-TikTok at all, but I think the wonder of reading a story, you bring it alive and you are your own TikTok.
So I just want to conclude with one sentence to say there is a collectivity to storytelling, as some of our people said, stories begin once upon a time. You're saying it to a group. So the group interaction or reading a book is very different from seeing it visually on one of the digital platforms.
Just like you saw the video, but in being connected with all of you, with your own memories and this was a community storytelling of the story of our book.
So that brings us to the end of this collective storytelling and hearing and listening about stories and seeing a few on the screen. Thank you very much to all the panelists and to this wonderful audience and the interactive session. Thank you.